Former Chinese Communist Party head Dze-mין has died of leukemia. What does his passing mean for China's politics? A man who rose to power writing on the aftermath of the Tiananmen Square massacre. How did Jiang help the regime push its global ambitions? NTD's Juliet Song has the details.
China's former leader Jiang Zemin died on Wednesday. He was 96 years old. A leader with blood on his hands, Jiang's prominence is tied to two of the biggest human rights abuses in China's recent history: the Tiananmen Square massacre and the persecution campaign against the country's largest spiritual group, Falun Gong. Jiang's reign also proved critical to Beijing's global ambitions.
Jiang's rule laid a foundation for the Chinese Communist Party. It allowed the regime to grow to a point to be able to compete with the U.S.
Heng He is a China affairs analyst. A close China watcher for the past decade, he hosts a show that tracks the inner workings of Beijing's communist leadership. He noted Jiang's reign represented a key stage in the regime's goal to replace the U.S. as top world superpower. He said even though Beijing still saw the U.S. as its enemy, it was not economically strong enough to compete.
And Jiang's goal was covering up Beijing's true ambitions and then using Washington's help to develop China and strengthen Beijing's political power.
He said Jiang's term marked the honeymoon stage of U.S.-China relations.
So people mistakenly thought that the Chinese Communist Party didn't have any ill intentions, that it was just learning from the West.
On the other hand,
the U.S. also had a need. The big money on Wall Street needed access to China's market, so both sides clicked.
Jiang shored up ties with the U.S., visiting the country several times. America also helped China enter the World Trade Organization, which paved the way for the country's rise to a global superpower. 2 decades after joining the World Trade Organization, China's GDP grew 8 times, becoming the world's second largest economy. Foreign capital poured into China, and Western markets opened their doors to Chinese goods, making China the world's largest goods exporter. Heng He noted understanding Jiang also clears up a misconception about Beijing's human rights abuses.
The rights abuse didn't come out of the blue under Xi Jinping's reign. It stretches all the way back to Jiang Zemin's persecution against Falun Gong.
Falun Gong is a spiritual meditation practice based on the principles of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. Its popularity exploded in China in the 90s, to the point that about 1 in every 13 Chinese citizens were practicing it. But in 1999, Jiang Zemin launched a nationwide persecution campaign against the practice. Millions of practitioners were thrown into jail and tortured. At least 4,000 have been killed. An unclear number had their organs harvested by force. Jiang is also tied to China's Tiananmen Square massacre.
He was able to become China's leader exactly because of the massacre. That's a reward for what he did during the crackdown.
In 1989, student protests erupted across China. And while China's rulers were divided on how to respond, Jiang already started clamping down on local protests in Shanghai. Later, the regime sent in tanks and opened fire on unarmed student protesters asking for democracy. The event came to be known as the Tiananmen Square massacre. Before the massacre, Jiang was Shanghai's party chief. He was about to retire from the position at the time. After it, China's then leader handpicked him to rule the country. As for the impact of Jiang's passing on China's politics,
I think it doesn't really have much impact on China's political state.
Now, Chinese leader Xi Jinping seems to have been working to diminish Jiang's political influence before his death. Xi's administration arrested many of Jiang's followers through an anti-corruption campaign. Juliet Song, NTD News.